No, what?
No, yes.
What is that? Take it away. Take it away. Energy.
Energy. Too much energy.
Too much energy. Hello from the...
Welcome to TableDropZone. My name is Loc.
And my name is Holger. And today we are switched. We're gonna try this because blue light is always mine and you get the picture. Sorry.
And today we will give you very interesting topic. It's about painting.
Painting for, you know, how to be Leonardo, well, bootleg Leonardo. No, so the idea of this video is you have just bought your first batch of absolutely super cool mechs or your first box of Warhammer and you just want to know what next. You are now in this friendly little game store, friendly local game store on the corner. You are standing in front of this rack with millions of colors with the weirdest name like Mephisto Red and Warg Flash.
Believe me, it's more complicated than the name of women lipstick.
So the question is, what next? And this is the video for you. You're an absolute beginner. You just want to get started, get some paint onto your miniatures. Want to know where you can go from there once you have done the first few steps. And we're going to tell you today.
Yeah. With that, let's start.
Let's start. The first thing we have to talk about is tools. And the first tool you will need, paint brushes. Millions and, no, actually you only had 3 paint brushes. So the 3 paint brushes we would say are good for starting are a small to medium sized brush. This is a Army Painter Hobby base coating brush. It's quite similar, a little bit bigger than a Citadel Layer M. I wouldn't go smaller than this. These brushes are big enough to absorb quite a bit of paint, so you can paint without stopping in between for a little bit. You can cover larger areas quickly enough, and they're still small enough to also get into most, if not all, of the details you will ever need on a miniature. The second paintbrush that we advise you to have is this is a Shade M. It's a bigger paintbrush. This has a couple of applications. The first one is, of course, shading itself. We'll tell you about that later. It's washing. The second one is, this is maybe a bit more interesting, to just cover a very large area. You will be painting a tank or something bigger, and then you will have a large area where you just have a single color. You just want to get this done. This is the brush for you. Finally, the final application we get to is priming. Just keep this in mind for now. These brushes are also really good for priming. The last brush is the dry brush. Now, dry brushing is a technique you will talk about later in this video. What's important about dry brushing is that you need a very soft brush and a brush that's a little bit bigger, so that you can very easily just swipe over the edges of your model with that. Citadel sells very hard bristled dry brushes. No, dry brushes are very soft. I use these a lot for getting into areas where this one just doesn't cut it anymore, like under an armpit or, you know, behind some cables of my Mechanicus armies, because those are a nightmare. But generally you would want one of these, and to get started, buying just this is sufficient.
And the next thing you need is a place to put your paint. For Citadel paint box, they already have the chase inside, so you don't need to buy any extra. But you may consider other paint trays like this thing for the dry paint. And you can use any kind of cardboard to put your paint on. And moreover, you also need a water container to clean your brush. And we use a jam jar to save money because it's free.
So now you have your tools, you have bought your 50 paint brushes, and you have emptied all the jam in your cupboard and have now 20 empty jars full of water in front of you. The question remains, what kind of paint? Where do I get the paint? So the idea on how to actually paint up a model is really up to you, and that is one of the coolest aspects of this hobby. You decide what colors you want. And there are many ways to get inspiration, which is maybe the bigger question. And we're going to cover a couple of these inspiration points here now in this section. So the first one is, well, if you play Battletech, camospecs.com. It's a fantastic website. If you want to play a very specific faction, there are many people who have painted excellent ideas for how to what kind of colors, etc. you would need on a Battletech model to make it look like that. Now these are of course mostly professional paint jobs, but you can simplify them quite a bit and very easily get to satisfactory results with that. Camo specs is a very good thing. Second thing, box art, especially for Warhammer. The box art essentially will tell you exactly how these things would look. There's also an app from Citadel that tells you exactly which paints you need to buy in order to get somewhere close to the result. And at the back of the box you also always have listed what kind of basic paints were used. And then, well, Instagram or YouTube. Right? So if someone posts an amazing picture that you really enjoyed on Instagram, or like a channel like has a rotating video of a miniature where you say this paint job is something I want to try out, then just contact them.
And for example, if you want to have the kind of setup paint that with the specific skill, Vallejo and Army Painter also offer lots pack of paint for you. For example, if you want kind of like a camo scheme for the tank, they already there. And all the brand like Vallejo, Army Painter and Citadel also offer the beginner pack of paint that contain all the paint you need to start.
Now if you were to ask us which two paints you absolutely need no matter what, black and white. It is good for lighting up colors, it is good for correcting mistakes, it is good for creating washes, it is good for dry brushing, and you can even go just with these two colors and create an amazing grayscale model very, very quickly. So our advice is buy the color you want, but also buy black and white if it's not in it already. So now you have bought your paints, or you're going to buy your paints because you've decided what kind of color you want. And now you're standing there in front of this rack again, and there's all these weird names to things. What is a primer? What is a speed paint? What is a layer paint? And this is what we're going to discuss here. So the first thing, very, very important, primer. Now, painting on plastic with acrylic colors or inks is actually very counterintuitive because usually the paint will not stick that well to plastic. And this is where the primer comes in. Primer is extremely sticky paint that essentially will give you a nice basing on which you can then very easily paint. Primer comes in very, very different variations. So for example, you can have different colors and you can have different ways to apply it. Citadel offers a rattle can. The downside of rattle can is if you live in an area with a high humidity and you spray it, it will likely get quite fuzzy because the spray will push the liquid onto the model and it will be in between the color and the model and will create like little fuzzy parts. Also, the proper dosage that if you spray it on with rattle can is quite difficult to get. Much easier is if you apply it with an airbrush or directly with a brush. And this is where what I talked earlier about the shading brush comes in. Now keep in mind, primer is extremely sticky. So what you want to do is you want to clean your brush really, really good afterwards. Maybe get even a brush cleaning medium or just work quickly and clean it very quickly afterwards.
Yeah, and secondly, you can see that type of like base and layer paint. The difference is between the layer and the base paint is just the thickness of the paint. The layer will be thinner. You also can always add more water to thinner your paint, and the base and the layer will have different in application on the model. But for the beginner, you don't need to consider about that right now. And the next thing is you should consider about the wash. It's very liquid color that rinses into the crevices that help to create a darker shading. It's very helpful to make your model look lively and beautiful.
And finally, we have speed paints, contrast paints, however the company calls it. These are quite transparent paints that when they accumulate become very, very dark very quickly. So the idea is that you paint them onto a very light surface, ideally white or somewhere in between. We talk about that in a bit. And then wherever the surface is kind of has an edge or is a little bit higher, it will rinse off and create only a thin film, essentially just tinting the surface. And wherever it gets very low, or like into a crevice, for example, it will accumulate and become very dark. The idea is that you essentially skip shading and highlighting with this and become quite quick. So let's talk about techniques. The first technique you want to talk about is dry brushing. Let me explain the very basic idea of why dry brushing is needed. When you have a miniature and you just paint it in a single color, it looks like, with the natural shading, it will always look like a normal miniature, like something small, because a normal shadow just looks different from a shadow that is kind of painted on to look like it is bigger than it would be. So shading and highlighting is where dry brushing comes in, both create a better illusion of how the model looks and how big it actually is. Because what you want is, you don't want it to be a small thing on the table, you want it to be a big thing from a distance. Dry brushing helps you to very easily get these highlights in, so that the shadows become more crisp and vibrant. So what you want is you have an edge, and you want the edge to be lighter, or you have like a waving cape, and although the high parts of that cape need to be a little bit brighter. And this is where dry brushing comes in. So how does dry brushing essentially work? What you do is you load very little paint onto the brush, and then you ideally, so what we always say is you take like an edge of something, like from this dry palette, and you brush across the edge until you have just enough paint on the brush to really only get the edge and not smear too much. And then you essentially just go over the edges, over the high parts of the models, everything where you think you need a highlight. It's quite easy and fast to do. It works really good for things where you have a ton of little ups and downs, like a face, for example. The second application of dry brushing is not over the paint, but underneath the paint, and then you put a very thin layer of paint on top of it. The most extreme variation of this is the slap chop, where you essentially take a black primer, then you paint very, 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 very thick white dry brush layer on it. Make sure you don't get too much of the crevices white as well. But if it happens, you just add some shade later on. And then you essentially have a grayscale version of what you want to have in the end. And all you need to do then is tint it in with transparent paints like speed paints or very thin layers of other paints, just to get the coloring into the grayscale. Or you can use inks as well. And this is called slap chop, and it's a very easy and fast way to paint a model. Essentially, most of our mechs are painted in slap chop. And you can see in the spinning videos, I also put a photo here, how that could look if you use that technique.
The next painting technique you need to consider is to use washes to make your miniature with very beautiful shading. We suggest that you only need to buy one bottle of wash from Citadel called non-oil because it's work well with own type of miniature. You also can build up your own wash by add your paint with a lot of water. So now you have everything to start your painting with your miniature, but what can you improve in the future? What you go from here?
There are a couple of things where we can now give you a little bit of a hint on what to look at next. The first one is tiny details. So the coolest thing about miniatures is that they are very, very detailed and have a lot of little things about them that make them so fascinating. And to carve out a few of these especially well with like a dot here, a dot of red on this little piece, a dot of silver on that little piece, the cockpits of the mechs are a perfect place to start. All of these things significantly improve right off the bat how your miniature looks. It just gives it a lot more for very little extra work. So it's a very easy way, and this you can always add on top.
And secondly, you can consider to do a lot of things with the base of the miniature. You can add many things, many stuff to create different surface by just adding with PVA glue or super glue. And you can also add some like flower and grass like this to make it so lively. And Citadel and Vallejo also offer many type for the base. You can consider like cracking paint or earth texture.
So instead of using a dry brush and a wash, you can do this by hand, by just making the base color a little bit lighter with some white or a little bit darker with some black, and using then a brush that you angle onto the area you want to highlight or dip into the crevice that you want to shade to create a more targeted shade and a more targeted highlight. Keep in mind, this technique is going to cost you a lot of time. However, the outcome of what you will achieve with that is a significant jump in quality.
And the next thing you can consider to buy is a wet palette. So the purpose of wet palette is to make your paint wet. Of course, normal palette, the paint will dry very fast. And with wet palette, it will keep it for hours, and it's also easier to thin out and mix paint together.
The last thing that you may want to look into is buying an airbrush. It's the best way for priming, and it opens the door to quite a few advanced techniques. An airbrush is a tool that needs a lot of care and work, however, also offers a lot of versatility on painting miniatures.
So it's all the things we want to introduce today to get started with your painting miniature. So for us, it's the most important thing. It's just get started with all the things and have fun painting and relaxing.
Yeah, so the idea is, I'm going to use my paintbrushes here. The idea of painting is, like everything in tabletop wargaming, have fun. If you really enjoy painting, there's a million ways and fantastic videos out there that can guide you all the way to the Golden Demon Award. And there's a lot of things on how to make a miniature look really good, really easily, with different techniques in different scenarios. And there's so much material on YouTube and generally on the internet to dig through if you want to indulge in painting. This is the starting point, probably, maybe it's a good starting point for you. But more than that, it would be the first step on a very, very long staircase. If you don't enjoy painting, you just want to get stuff done, get stuff on the table, then this is also definitely a tutorial that could help you quite far to just get the models finished, get them on the table, and they will look decent. They're not going to be the most amazing models in the world, but you will be happy with them, and then it's fast, it's doable. You know, on a weekend you can probably paint an army with these techniques. And yeah, that's essentially what this video was designed to do.
Thank you for watching our video, and support us in the future by subscribe our channel and like and comment for our video.
Yeah, that's all from our side.
Yeah, that's all for today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.